there may be a misconception that resilience measures are extremely costly, especially in a development context. It is just an incremental cost, if any. It's more about making informed decisions so that your building retains the value and is actually worth more over time. Ideally, upon exit, right? You have more equity in the property and the building's worth more. That's what everyone wants. So I really just think of it as smart risk management rather than another hoop to jump through.
Welcome to Sustainability Leaders. I'm Michael Torrance, Chief Sustainability Officer at BMO. On this show, we will talk with leading sustainability practitioners from the corporate, investor, academic, and NGO communities to explore how this rapidly evolving field of sustainability is impacting global investment, business practices, and our world.
The views expressed here are those of the participants and not those of Bank of Montreal, its affiliates, or subsidiaries.
Welcome back to another episode. I am Alma Cortés Selva, Senior Advisor at the BMO Climate Institute. We will be talking today about property resilience to climate risk. We will discuss why it's important to have standards and how it can help minimize the damages to real estate. I'm joined today by Holly Neber, the Chief Resiliency Officer at AEI Consultants and the Chair of the ASTM Task Group. Welcome to the show, Holly. And if you don't mind, could you please introduce yourself a little bit more? And then what do you do at AEI Consultants?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. My background is doing property assessments for commercial real estate decision makers. And today I have what I consider the coolest job ever. As Chief Resilience Officer at AEI, I really look at myself as a future proofer for both our people and our clients. I help make sure our team stays ahead of the curve in this quickly changing world where all of the commercial real estate assessments and risk management that happens needs to be climate informed, and also making sure AEI is prepared to support our clients, which are global commercial real estate lenders, developers, and investors, to make smart decisions about their commercial real estate holdings.
Let's go over what is the PRA or the Property Resiliency Assessment Standard, and then why do we need one?
Well, just to paint a picture for you, think about how sophisticated investors would research any major investment decision. They're gathering information, getting expert opinions to make informed decisions. And these expert opinions often come in the form of standardized reports, which is why these standards are so powerful, because they influence decision-making at scale. Probably the most common ASTM standard used in commercial real estate is called a Phase 1 environmental site assessment. It's like a background check for property contamination. Nobody wants to buy a property and then find out it was built on top of an old chemical dump, right? Or if they do buy a property that has an old chemical dump on it, they want to know that ahead of time so that they can include that in their underwriting. So standards help people understand what they're buying and if there are any significant impairments to value. And now we're living in a world where the physical impacts of climate change to commercial real estate is growing. Insurance costs are going through the roof, and investors are demanding to know more about the risks in any given portfolio. And just to take a little bit of a step back, commercial real estate has always been about making a play based on your unique understanding of the risk in the hopes of a better return. And so now physical climate data has become ubiquitous in commercial real estate decision-making, really. I mean, even Zillow is now showing climate risk on their listings, right? That's how mainstream this has become. But back in the commercial real estate space, what decision makers are often lacking is, what do I do with this information? Maybe I ran my whole portfolio through one of the commercial physical risk modeling platforms and found a third of my assets are subject to some sort of significant risk. So that's what the Property Resilience Assessment Standard does. It provides a roadmap for, how to look at the risks, to identify which hazards are a concern for the property, and then what to do about that on a property level. So really provides this framework for quantifying the potential damage and downtime at a property by evaluating the hazards, the vulnerabilities, and the exposure in a standardized way, and then making resilience recommendations if necessary. So an example use case would be a hospitality owner They have a large portfolio of resorts throughout the globe and coastal locations, right? You can imagine these beautiful places we'd all like to go to vacation. But these owners are faced with a lot of hazards, and those hazards are becoming more extreme over time, right? So they would order a property resilience assessment. They might do their whole portfolio first to understand which sites have the highest risk. And then they would go down to the property level for those sites that have elevated risk to really be clear about what the likely hazards are at the property level. How vulnerable are the physical assets at that property? And that would include the buildings, the infrastructure, roadways to and from the building, and so on. And then what is the possible financial impact of a hazard event or chronic condition so that it really becomes quantifiable, potential damage, potential downtime. And then that information can be used in their capital planning in the case of properties they already own, or can be used in underwriting in an acquisition scenario. They may even use the information to get a discount on the purchase price of a new asset, right? Like, hey, I want this property, but our property resilience assessment indicated we're going to need to make another $1 million in upgrades related to flood damage prevention. So we want you to shave that off the purchase price. Those kinds of conversations are happening. So those are some examples that led to the standard being created, but the motivations for creating the standard also included reporting, increasing pressure from investors and regulators to disclose what physical risks exist in a portfolio and the desire to act on that information. Exit strategies. Everyone wants to know their exit strategies. When should I sell the asset? When will the music stop? When should I invest more into resilience measures or stop investing? Insurance coverage. How can we predict what the annual insurance cost increases will be? No one has a magic crystal ball here, but everyone wants to know what's the direction of change going to be, and how can we manage that risk of rising insurance costs? How we might actually make upgrades and retrofits at the building to then take on more of the risk ourselves and reduce the amount of capital going to insurance carriers too as part of that strategy. And then just generally the desire to have climate-informed risk management processes, which all comes back to ultimately preserving and growing property value. So those are a lot of the drivers for why we started our work and what the PRA is being used for today.
That's really exciting. I know that this wasn't a single effort. It was like several organizations came together. How many organizations are part of the task force or task group? And then are they from the private sector, academia? It seems like it's a very diverse group. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so as the chair of the task group, the most fun part was reaching out and networking with people in the commercial real estate and scientific communities to recruit them to this effort. We started this a few years ago, and today we have over 200 technical experts and industry leaders representing a wide variety of interests and different types of stakeholders: engineering, architecture, earth sciences, geologists, property insurance, climate science and climate risk modeling folks, people from law, finance, financial risk management, construction and development, property ownership, investors. All these people are coming to the same problem, which is how do we quantify the physical risk and then what do we do about it? So all those stakeholders. And then in addition, we had a number of nonprofit organizations focused on atmospheric research, climate risk and adaptation, resilience and sustainability. So it was probably one of the most fun things in my career is to bring all these stakeholders together and see how we each approach the problem from different angles, and then ultimately come up with the standard that was published late 2024.
Are these just US-based efforts, North America, or all over the globe?
The task group is primarily US based, although we do have a number of folks from Canada and a few from the UK. But the ASTM standards are global standards, so they can certainly be applied in any context.
Thank you. It sounds like a really big effort, and it really required coordinating with the different organizations. You mentioned that it kind of was done in stages or like levels, the PRA, whenever you buy a property or are assessing it. How many stages are we talking about? You mentioned, hey, if you want to build it, you're going to go over and then look at the climate hazards that may be located on that property. How many are there? And then how many risks are we covering? Are we covering all of them? There's quite a bit of risk. So if you don't mind going through the process, telling us the stages, and then how many risks are we talking about?
Yes, I'd be happy to explain sort of the PRA process and how we start. So the very beginning of the process, before you begin the property resilience assessment itself, is understanding which hazards are important to the user. So some banks, let's say lending institutions, they are very specific. They only want to look at a few of the hazards. Others, let's say a developer, again, like the hospitality example, they want to see everything. What might affect my property? So that's the first step, is understanding what are the hazards we want to consider in the assessment. We also want to understand what is the timeline, what's the hold period, what's the time horizon that the user is looking at, and then what is the risk appetite and the materiality question. What level of detail do we need to get to on the damage quantification so that we can tell them if that potential damage will be material to their decision making. So once we have established that, then we start the property resilience assessment, and that's a 3-stage process. Stage 1 is all about identifying which hazards will likely cause an impact to the property. They're utilizing commercial, climate, and catastrophe models to identify for the property level what we think the impacts may be. This may include frequency and severity information. I think one of the really important points for this first stage is that we're also verifying this information with any local or regional resources that might exist. Stage 2 is physically visiting the property. So that's the building detective work, where we have engineers and architects going out there. They're looking at plans, of course, to understand how it was built, what codes it was built to, how old it is, and then also observing in the present day, what's the current condition. So it's really like a physical exam to see how the building might perform in the hazards that were identified in stage 1. And in this stage, we're also looking at kind of operational readiness. You could imagine an assisted living facility. The building itself, the structure itself, needs to be prepared for whatever conditions may occur. So it's like a full checkup about how this property would likely respond. And then stage 3 is where we identify the resilience measures that may need to be put in place. Those might be flood barriers, moving critical equipment to higher ground. It might be emergency preparedness measures that need to be put in place. And all of this is going to be tied back to the financial analysis.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting, especially for the builders to see that there's ROI returns, because a lot of the times people think that it's actually maybe not profitable, that you have to do it, but it's not really profitable. But you're mentioning that by doing it, you're seeing at the end on stage 3, hey, how is this helping you save money? And on that note, is that how you're envisioning that the standards are helping the underwriters and risk management, like by saving cost? And then there's a little bit of a dichotomy between the need for standards for resiliency, but then we also need to simplify the regulations, since the industry is already struggling with development cost, the cost of delivery. How do you see that dichotomy? Because both are needed.
Yes, the standardization of any activity does help reduce the amount of time and delays that might occur as people exchange information back and forth and try to make a good decision. So an example is the environmental site assessment that I mentioned earlier. Back when those first started in the early 90s, it was the Wild West. There was 100 different types of environmental reports someone could obtain. The costs were all over the place. The industry really just didn't know, and there was no consistent way to communicate about environmental hazards at a property. I think we're sort of in the same place right now with physical climate risk, where it's the Wild West of climate modeling. And so the property resilience assessment really becomes that single source of truth to bring that all together and say, we looked at all of these reports, we visited the site, and here's where we believe the best area of resilience investment may be. And again, like I was saying, resilience investment may not even be needed. It might just be kind of clarifying what those desktop models are showing. So I think the way I look at it is, if you're developing something, you're making a big investment, why wouldn't you want to know what future conditions are going to be? If you're going on a trip somewhere, you check the weather, right? And so it's a similar thing. And I think there may be a misconception that resilience measures are extremely costly, especially in a development context. it is just an incremental cost, if any. It's more about making informed decisions so that your building retains the value and is actually worth more over time. Ideally, upon exit, right? You have more equity in the property and the building's worth more. That's what everyone wants. So I really just think of it as smart risk management rather than another hoop to jump through.
You mentioned that climate change is also increasing the operating cost because we're seeing that it leads to physical risk. Physical risk, it's leading to more floods, more frequent severity. How is that changing or helping the standards, the affordability of the properties by you already know that you have a hazard, let's say flood, and then you're more prone to it, you took measures. How is that helping reduce the operating cost and maybe helping the property affordability? And then are we also seeing the component of by having resilient buildings, are there states or companies that are providing an insurance premium reduction?
Yeah, I think insurance is a really interesting topic. And one thing I'll say is that the property resilience assessment may help to document resilience measures, which may result in more affordable insurance. That's one true thing. There's other ways to look at it, though. That is that insurers, when they're pricing property policies, are utilizing data points about the buildings in their modeling. And if they don't have accurate information, the pricing is not going to be as ideal as you would want it to be. So, for example, we helped a client with wind coverage in Florida, and the renewals were coming back. It was a very hard market last year. Coming back at 300% increase or something was really affecting the net operating income of the building. And as a result of the PRA, we were just able to document that it had a newer roof than what the insurer was modeling. And that provided access to more coverage than what they were able to get. That brought the price down significantly. So sometimes it's not that you have to implement a resilience measure, it's that you just need to tell the story better about what the current attributes of the building are. So I just want to make that point. But we are seeing some states in the US already offering insurance breaks for resilient buildings. For instance, California's Safer from Wildfires program offers premium incentives for wildfire risk reduction. Louisiana has a fortified homes program. This is more on the residential side, but I think it's a signal of where things are going.
There's a federal loan guarantee that actually is related with climate. It's the MLI Select program in Canada. How does it relate with the PRA standards, and how do you see it playing a major role in Canada?
The PRA standard is really meant to be flexible to many different contexts and scenarios. For instance, people who are doing global sustainability reporting are utilizing it to qualify for the physical risk requirement to be evaluating physical risks at their properties. And similarly, when we talk about affordable housing anywhere in the globe, as also Canada, thinking about who the stakeholders are for the property is a big part of the process. Thinking about how resilience might show up in an affordable housing situation, an LMI situation, is really important and spelled out in the standard. But we left the standard very general and flexible for that reason, so that it could be applied in any given context.
Thank you so much, Holly. Are there next steps for the group, or are they done with their work?
So our group continues to meet monthly and share information with each other. We just had a fascinating presentation, actually, from Urban Land Institute. If your listeners are familiar with Urban Land Institute, they just created a really great resource that basically lists all of the secondary modifiers that the insurance carriers use for physical risk at properties, and categorizes them by the type of hazard that you could be, affecting or mitigating against. And then it lets you know if you implement this resilience measure, it could benefit you in your insurance costs in the following ways. So it's a really powerful tool for Urban Land Institute members, and we're hoping they may release that more publicly soon. But that's the kind of learning that we do as a group. We also have a number of members from Canada that are doing presentations on how resilience is being considered for infrastructure in Canada, which is I think Canada's ahead of the US in a lot of ways on that front. So so we meet monthly, we talk, we share knowledge, and the ASTM standards, all ASTM standards have to be updated frequently. So we go through, I believe it's a 5-year cycle. So we have a few more years where we can just gather feedback for how the PRA is going, what might we want to change in the future iteration. And in the meantime, just continue to learn from one another.
Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you would like to add before the end of the episode? And where can people reach out to learn more about the ASTM standards?
So if you just Google or search however you want to search, ASTM E3429, Property Resilience Assessment, you will find all the information you need about this particular standard, the Property Resilience Assessment Guide. And in general, ASTM standards are available on their website. If anyone's interested in joining the task group or learning more information about this effort, they are welcome to reach out to me, and we'd love to get them engaged in the conversation. There's just so much happening in this space, and everyone's perspective as a user or a provider is really valuable. So the invitation is open.
Thank you so much, Holly. It was great learning about the PRA assessment standard.
Thank you so much, Alma. It was wonderful to be here.
Thanks for listening to Sustainability Leaders. This podcast is presented by BMO. You can find our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. Press the follow button if you want to get notified when new episodes are published. We value your input, so please leave a rating, review, and any feedback that you might have, or visit us at bmo.com/sustainability leaders. Our show and resources are produced with support from BMO's marketing team and Puddle Creative. Until next time, thanks for listening and have a great week.
For BMO disclosures, please visit bmocm.com/podcast/disclaimer.